All right, everybody, welcome back into another Stadium Seat Sports podcast. As always, my name's Coop, here with my partner and co-host Crib. Today we're going to be talking about the Week 2 slate games that we highlighted for you in our Week 2 preview. You know, and I think it's pretty funny. We looked at this week in college football landscape of this year, didn't see a lot of great games outside of like Texas, Michigan, and maybe a few others, and we got absolute chaos all weekend. So can't wait to, jump in here and talk about it. First one we're going to start with is the game we started with last week. Going to be number 3 Texas traveling up to the Big House to face number 10 Michigan. This game, I think we both saw Texas winning this game, but the fashion in which it took place was astounding to me. Texas was vastly superior to Michigan in all phases of the game. Their offense looked incredible. They looked like they could score with ease on pretty much every single drive in that game. Ewers, after that game, he's my Heisman favorite. And I think he actually is technically the betting favorite after that game, after looking at ESPN's bet Twitter page. But I thought he showed incredible poise and leadership during that game. And I think Texas cemented themselves in the top 3 teams in college football as like the upper echelon with Georgia and Ohio State, in my opinion. Like Michigan's defense, they're solid. But their defensive line, which was supposed to be one of the best in all of college football this year, got absolutely pushed around in this game. And they've got a great elite cornerback in Will Johnson. But truthfully, after him, there's a pretty significant drop-off of the cornerback position for Michigan. And when you have as many good to great to potentially elite wide receivers as Texas does, Will Johnson might shut one down or make it difficult for that one receiver. But then you got options on every other position at the wide receiver position on the ball, or on the field rather, and Michigan doesn't have the cornerbacks to stop him outside of Will Johnson, truthfully. And their offense, I don't have a single positive thing to say about their offense, if I'm being honest with you. Their quarterback play is atrocious. I've got major concerns for them. I think at best, this team is 9-3. I don't think that they beat USC. I don't think that they beat Ohio State. And honestly, I would have said at the beginning of the year, I'm not sure that they'll beat Oregon. We'll touch on Oregon a little bit later here today. That one I can't read at this point, but I'm glad to have seen Texas play as well as they did in this game, considering we both picked them. And I think that they're going to do just fine in the SEC and in the postseason too. So excited to see what your thoughts are coming out of this game.
Yeah, I think you had a lot of really good points there. For me, I actually ended up, I know at the end of our show last week, in the preview, my pick of the week was Texas minus 7.5. And I actually took an alternate line, minus 9.5, right before kickoff there. I just had that feeling that Texas, it was just a way more complete team. And I think that's exactly what we saw on the field. Quinn Ewers, I think he not only put himself right in the front of the Heisman race, but also he made himself a lot of money. He looked very poised. It just seemed like anytime there's pressure, he navigated the pocket. He did not panic, and he found the open player almost all the time. It was very impressive to see. He was in control. Nothing was phasing him. It was he's going to give Texas a real shot to go all the way. So that was very promising to see there for them. And then the one thing that really stood out to me too was Texas just played bully ball the whole game, both sides of the ball. Defensive line, offensive line, and I mean even the guys in the secondary and the linebackers, they were flying around. They were incredibly well disciplined outside of that one offensive lineman. I can't recall his name, but I think he had 4 penalties and no one else had any. If he didn't do that, this game would have been a way bigger blowout than what we saw. So for me, Texas, like you said, easily a top 3 team. Probably top 2 just based on having that big of a win on the road. Yeah. And for Michigan, quarterback room is absolutely horrendous. Orgy is used as a gimmick quarterback that doesn't work. Warren, I thought he had a few randomly very nice passes mixed in there, but he's just not dynamic enough to do anything. And that run game could not get going either. So Donovan Edwards has been a huge letdown, and if Michigan can't get that run game going, I know you said 3 losses, they're going to be battling week in, week out if that's how their offense is going to perform. So, Yeah, expect the unexpected, but Texas absolutely dominated.
Yeah, they really did. I was highly impressed. And like you said before we move on to the next game, like I think that they absolutely I think the top three in college football is very obvious in Georgia, Ohio State, and Texas. I'm perfectly fine with having Texas 1 or Texas 2. I think Georgia and Texas should be 1, 2, just given the resume. I know Ohio State, to no fault of their own, hasn't played anybody at this point, and they've looked great, especially this past week against Western Michigan. But I think the top three in college football has really risen to the top, and there's a pretty decent separation between those three and the rest right now, at least.
For sure. That's definitely what it feels like. And moving on to the next game, in-state rivals, Iowa State versus Iowa. Obviously, Iowa entered ranked at number 21. It really felt like Iowa had this game in control and that it was going to be a foregone conclusion that they were going to win this game. Caleb Johnson played great. He ran for just under 200 yards, and they still couldn't win. And I think it all comes back to the same issue that Iowa has year in, year out, and that's that offense. And in this case, it was Cade McNamara who he didn't have to do anything special, and he threw for under 50% from the field. But the real issue was the 2 interceptions. I mean, he just has to manage the game with that good of a defense, and it just seemed like he was trying way too hard to make something happen and take Iowa to that next level with a actual functioning offense, where they really didn't need to. They could have just leaned on Caleb Johnson and controlled the clock and play the field position game like they normally do. I know it's a very boring style, but it's led to a lot of wins over the past few years for Iowa. So, yeah, I mean, they flat out blew it. Iowa State never gave up, and they just kept chipping away, and they stuck to their game plan. And I mean, neither team was that great, but Iowa State kind of just did just enough to win.
Yeah, and I only have a couple additional points here in this game. Ultimately, I wasn't overly impressed with either team coming out of this game, to be honest with you. Iowa had the game secured despite playing mediocre at best. I'm going to give credit to Iowa State where credit is due for pulling out the win, but overall, I didn't come out of this game feeling better about either one of these teams. And I'm going to eat my crow for what I said last week in our preview, where I said that I think Iowa's offense has kind of turned the corner where they put up 40 points. That is absolutely not the case.
Nope.
I thought that maybe they had found something with Cade McNamara, but lo and behold, it's the same team. They've got a great to elite defense and a bad to average offense at best. Cade McNamara in this game posted a QBR of 9.7. Let that sink in. 9.7. I mean, you truthfully have to try to have a QBR that bad. And the fact of the matter is Iowa State won this game, but Cade posted a QBR of 9.7 and Iowa State barely won this game, which is why I said I don't come out of this game feeling better about either one of these teams. So Iowa State to me was one of those sneaky teams I thought could make a run in the Big 12 after that performance, and maybe it was just a one-off and it was a bad performance, but I don't feel that way anymore. Like, I don't feel like they can compete in the Big 12 this year. So ultimately, it's kind of the game you expected in an Iowa State game, but it was ugly, to say the least, for truthfully both of these teams.
Yeah, I agree. And the only, I think, silver lining you can give Iowa State, even though they won, obviously, but for future prospects, is that it was a rivalry game and you kind of throw the books out the window when those happen. And it could be an outlier completely. They might be better than that. They could be way worse than that. So the next few weeks for them will be interesting for sure. And then the next game here we have is Tennessee, number 14 versus 24 NC State. And honestly, we both talked about this beforehand, but we thought Tennessee would win this game. We thought they'd win because of Nico and his just game-breaking ability. And he had some moments. He had a nice long run for a touchdown. He threw for 3 touchdowns. But he did have 2 interceptions, and he looked a little human. So he's still a very young quarterback with very limited experience, so it's not to say that's unexpected, but they kind of lean back on the run game with Dylan Sampson, 132 yards, 2 touchdowns. So I mean, the offense was good, but it wasn't the Tennessee high-powered offense we kind of thought we would see necessarily. I mean, they scored a lot of points, obviously, but not. They didn't look the way that you would expect them to hit that point total. But for me, the most impressive thing was Tennessee's defense. I
Yep.
mean, they held Grayson McCall to 104 yards passing and 3 turnovers. I mean, it's insane. I mean, very low passing yards, forcing turnovers. I mean, they made their presence felt, and they even had a pick six. So they went into North Carolina and made a name for themselves on the defensive end. And if Tennessee can bring that defensive effort game in,
Mhm.
game out, and Nico and that offense continues to improve, I know they were 14 going into that game. They're going to be top 10, and they're going to be very, very dangerous come playoff time.
Yeah, and I mean, I just have a couple of points, to throw in here before we move on to the next game. But you really hit and hammered on the point that I wanted to talk about with Tennessee, which is the fact that I was so impressed with their defense. Their defense appears to be great to potentially elite. Now, as you mentioned, Nico did make some mistakes in this game, which is not uncommon for a first year starter at quarterback. What I was impressed with, number one, he averaged 9.2 yards per play in this game, which is very, very, very good against a ranked opponent in number 24, NC State. And I thought that when he had the turnovers, he showed poise and a mature nature in the sense that he didn't let it rattle him. I thought that he looked like a veteran quarterback in that sense where he was like, you know what? I made a mistake. I actually made a couple of mistakes, but he still went out there and led his team to a very, very impressive victory. And I think that that's something that Tennessee fans and that program can hang their hats on because that's going to bode very well for them, down the line here this year. We said earlier in our week 2 preview that I think McCall playing elite was the only real shot NC State had in this game. And that Tennessee defense made his day miserable. And the result was a 51-10 drubbing by Tennessee. Tennessee had 13 tackles for loss in this game. 13 tackles for loss. I mean, that defensive line absolutely ate up against the NC State offensive line. And they also had a really good, balanced offensive attack. I think Nico was very good. Like I said, he had 9.2 yards per play. They also had 249 yards total rushing the ball, split amongst 5 different players, Nico being one of them. So overall, very impressed with Tennessee. I would have them, certainly well within the top 7 in college football right now. I think that they're absolutely a viable and dangerous team to make the 12-team playoff. And then once they get in there, if the rest of the season goes as we think it will, they're going to be very, very dangerous and a team that you don't want to play, especially if they're balanced on both sides of the ball, which they seem to be.
Yeah, all great points there. And then the next game on the schedule was, of course, Colorado versus Nebraska.
Yep.
And I'll let you take this away. This was your game of the week as far as the pick. So, yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, it certainly was. And we were both correct with our games of the week. Picks with you, had Texas -7.5. I said Nebraska hammer at -7 against Colorado here. Dylan Raiola and Nebraska really impressed me in this game. I picked Nebraska to win easily, but I didn't think it would look as dominant as it did. And it was far more dominant than the final score would indicate, which I believe it was 28-10 was the final score. It was 28-0 going into halftime. Like Nebraska was very impressive in this game. Dylan Raiola looks like the real deal. He's going to sling it and he's going to take some risks. But if those risks pay off, he can be one of the better quarterbacks in the Big Ten, even as a true freshman. And I think Nebraska's defensive line had Colorado's offensive line in hell this entire game. The center for Colorado legitimately probably had one of the worst games he'll ever have in his career. I felt terrible for that man. Nebraska's defensive line was just wrecking absolute havoc. And I think, we already knew that Colorado's offensive line was a big problem. It was a big problem last year. We were concerned about it coming into this year. And I just want to say this, and I'm going to preface this statement by saying this is not me calling out, Shedor's character or anything like that. I'm sure that there is more to the story. Maybe a reporter asked him this specific question, but him calling out his offensive line publicly, to me, just doesn't sit right with me. And 2 things can be true at once. He's not wrong. his offensive line played very bad in this game. Nebraska's defensive line, give them a lot of credit for that. But also, it's not something that should be said publicly, because the quickest way to lose members of your team, especially the members of your team that are basically built around protecting you and giving you the time to do your thing because you're an extremely talented player, is just not, it's not a wise decision. I think it speaks to Colorado's program being a bit broken right now, on top of Shedeur walking off the field before the game ended. So I just wanted to, I wanted to touch on that. And again, it's not me hammering his character or anything like that. I'm sure he's a great young man, and there's probably more to the story than what you saw in the social media clips about that segment. But regardless, even if he was asked about that and kind of led to answer that question, there's a way to shut it down and then talk with your team privately about the issues that we saw on the field. So, I think that that's problematic for them on top of the problems that they just have on the field in general. And then before I let you talk about this game, Nebraska, they're likely going to be undefeated when they come to Columbus to face Ohio State. So that's going to be an extremely exciting game. I'm very, very much so looking forward to that, assuming both teams take care of business leading up into that game. And Nebraska, you know what? They're one of those teams that has really struggled over the last few years in terms of their record, but they were always so close to having a 500 or better record if like one or two games, even more than that last year, went their way. And if they've got control and poise and they play as a unit with a talented quarterback in Dylan Raiola, Nebraska very much may find themselves competing not just in the Big Ten, but in college football in general. So very impressed with them.
Yeah, those were all good points, and I just want to make a quick point as well. I think Colorado is just dead in the water. They did not improve anything that was an issue last year from their 4-win season. So this is not very surprising that's playing out this way. And also great points on Shedeur Sanders kind of just not handling things necessarily the right way, keep things in house. But yeah, I agree that team's in a lot of trouble, and I don't think they're going to get out of it. So
No.
I think we'll see some changes in Colorado after Sanders goes pro.
Yeah, no, I fully agree. And the next game that we're gonna jump in here, and this was Oregon against Boise State, and we called this one out last week as an upset watch. And for me to say I'm concerned for Oregon, like that is quite possibly the understatement of the college football year so far. Like their offensive line remains a huge problem, and I mentioned it last week in our preview of week 2. The quickest way to mitigate a huge talent advantage, which Oregon had in this game and Oregon had in week 1, is to make them one-dimensional. And truthfully, in my honest opinion, if Boise State had a better quarterback, they very likely may have won this game. Like, Dylan Gabriel has been solid for Oregon, but they're a one-dimensional football team right now. And if they can't figure out how to run the ball, they're going to have a really hard time winning in the Big Ten, because the defenses that they're going to be facing coming up, even before you get to the Ohio State game, are going to be much more stout and much better than the two that they faced early on. And they've already had little to no success running the football at this point in time. I would have to have somebody fact check me on this, but I think in the last 2 years, Oregon gave up 5 sacks in both of those years. The entire year, their offensive line has given up 7 sacks in 2 games this year. I mean, that is a massive problem. And defensively, they've got problems as well. It doesn't appear that their defensive line is getting nearly the push that they should. They're having problems stopping the run. Now, granted, Jonty, I'm not exactly sure how you pronounce his name. He's amazing. He's a Heisman 1B behind Quinn Ewers for me. The things that he has done in the first 2 weeks have been nothing short of amazing. But the fact of the matter is you're going to continue to see some really good running back rooms as you get into Big Ten play. Ohio State's probably got the best running back room, 1-2 punch in the entire country. If their defense doesn't figure out how to stop the run, or at least get better at stopping the run, Ohio State's going to have a field day in that game. The talent is absolutely there with Oregon. The execution right now is poor at best. And I was very hopeful in Dan Lanning and this team to fix their issues from week 1 to week 2. And I think you made the point of, hey, it's either going to be a blowout or we could be looking at an upset here. They didn't seem to fix those problems at all. If anything, some of them actually seem to get worse. So I have major concerns. They're playing Oregon State this weekend, and what I would have thought would have been an easy victory doesn't look to be anymore. And I would not be surprised if they could potentially, be on upset alert basically every week of the season, if and until they show that they have fixed these problems. So I'm excited and interested to hear, what you think about this game, because I am basically as concerned as I could be for this team.
Yeah, and I think for one, I mean, Oregon looking the way they have the first 2 weeks is just probably the most shocking thing to start the season. Outside of another upset we're going to talk about here in a minute, but
Yep.
barely winning these last 2 games and just looking the way they have, it's very concerning. And just for me, you already touched on it, but if they can't figure out how to stop the run or at least slow it down, it's not going to get any easier. Their level of opponents are only going to go up. So um, they could be in for a very upsetting season for Oregon fans if they can't figure that out in the slightest. So
Yeah,
um,
absolutely. And it would be a very disappointing year because they've got all the talent in the world. They really do. They have all the talent to be able to compete with the Georgias and the Texas and the Ohio States of the world. But right now, they do not look like they're going to sniff anything close to a championship, let alone potentially even the playoffs, as the year goes on, if they don't fix these issues and get significantly better. So be interested to see how they respond this weekend against Oregon State.
yeah, absolutely. And then the next game here that we had on upset watch and we got right was Georgia Tech going to Syracuse, and I'll let you kick things off.
Yeah, we both had Syracuse in this game, and I think the primary reason we both had Syracuse in this game was because of Kyle McCord, and we were significantly impressed with what he had done the previous week. I mean, he is absolutely thriving at Syracuse, and it's fantastic to see. I just don't think that he was a great fit at Ohio State last year in that system, but the tangibles are there with this quarterback. He's thriving at Syracuse, and it's really very happy for the young man. He has the team playing really well, and while Miami is the front runner win the in the ACC, especially with how bad Florida State has looked, we'll see about Clemson because they kind of got dog walked against Georgia, but then absolutely wrecked havoc this past weekend and looked very good. But Syracuse could potentially be a sneaky team in the ACC if they continue to get QB play like this from Kyle McCord. And I think what's even more impressive is like Haynes King actually played quite well in this game, and Georgia Tech did not play poorly. So this really came down to McCord just slightly outdueled Haynes King, and McCord was getting hammered last year when he was at Ohio State. So to see this guy thriving in this system that he's comfortable with, he knows a lot of different people in and around that program. He just looks to be in a much better spot than he was last year, and really excited to see what each team does the rest of the way, because Georgia Tech appears to be much better than what we thought they were going into week 0 when they beat Florida State in Ireland. And Syracuse sitting there 2-0. And while, again, I don't think that they're the leaders in the ACC, I think Miami definitely has that title. If they keep getting this, good to great quarterback play from Kyle McCord, they could be a team that you don't necessarily want to see on your schedule.
I agree. They're going to be a dangerous team if McCord's able to keep up at this level. And I know you already hit on it, but McCord, he found his place at Ohio State. He was another one of the guys. You're in a room full of 5-stars, and now he's the lone 5-star kind of guy. And I feel like it just allowed him to kind of take that ownership and be a leader, and he has confidence now too.
Yeah.
And you can see it. He's a lot more emotional on the sideline than he ever was. It's great to see, and yeah, that they'll continue to be a dangerous team.
Yeah, absolutely. And before we wrap up here, guys, the one game that we didn't touch on in our week 2 preview, because no one thought that we were going to have to touch on this game, but we absolutely need to touch on it really quickly before we end this recording, is Northern Illinois upsetting Notre Dame. So I'm going to let you kick this one off, because I know we both have some strong thoughts and opinions on this game. So
Yeah. So obviously, completely shocking upset, but it's almost like Notre Dame's MO now to have a loss like this every season.
yep.
Last year was Marshall. Now this year was Northern Illinois, and it just seems to always play out that way for them, especially this past year. I mean, they went on the road week one and beat Texas A&M, and I mean, we can go into this in another episode, but what does that say about Texas A&M
Yep.
losing to a Notre Dame team who loses to Northern Illinois? So,
Yeah.
but for me, really, I mean, Notre Dame's defense perfectly fine. You give up 14 points. It's not great against a team like Northern Illinois, but I mean, in all honesty, if they hold the team to 14 points at Notre Dame, you should win 99% of the time, 95% of the time. But it really comes down to Riley Leonard, I think. And unfortunately, he seems to be pretty limited in what he's able to do. He's not really able to drive the ball downfield. They tried to run him this. I think he had like 11 carries this past game, but he averaged less than 2 yards per carry, which was a pretty drastic difference from the week before, where he was making some clutch plays with his legs. So
Yep.
I mean, I don't know what it is. He could not click and make anything happen with throws downfield, and maybe that's just because Northern Illinois saw how they used him the week before, and they said, "Hey, let's take that element of his game out and see what he can do." And guess what? It worked out because they could not score. So, great job for Northern Illinois. I still think Notre Dame has relatively an easy schedule, even though we thought that after Texas A&M they had just as easy a schedule. So we'll see if that actually matters or not. But yeah, unfortunately for Notre Dame, they had their classic loss to an inferior team. So, I mean, we'll see what they do, but very concerning for them.
Yeah. And I just wanted to make a quick correction. Northern Illinois scored 16 points in this game. Notre Dame scored 14, so they won 16-14.
That's right. Thank you.
But but Leonard, as you mentioned, like he's got the ability to run the ball, although he didn't run it, as well in this game. And he can make some of the easier throws, but Notre Dame's offense seems manufactured, and they truthfully seem to lack the ability to move the ball down the field vertically. It almost is reminiscent to me of what Penn State was last year, and we know Penn State has all the talent in the world, but when you can't move the ball down the field vertically, that's a huge problem, and you become stagnant, and your offense sputters, like we saw Notre Dame do in this game. And it's truly bizarre to me, and I honestly don't know where Notre Dame goes from here, because Marcus Freeman seems to have Notre Dame ready for the big games. Yeah, they lost the last 2 years to Ohio State, but Notre Dame was ready in those games. Those were battles. Ohio State came out on top in both of those games, but Notre Dame looked fired up. They looked ready to go, and they gave Ohio State everything that they could handle. Last week, they go to Kyle Field and face Texas A&M, and maybe Texas A&M is overrated, as you hinted at. That's quite a possibility. But going down to Kyle Field and playing Texas A&M in your first week of the year is no easy feat. And Marcus Freeman and Notre Dame were ready for that game. And then, for whatever reason, in what should be the easy games, they are ill-prepared. And that's highly concerning. And that's why I say I don't know where Notre Dame goes for here. And I'm not, suggesting that Notre Dame fires Marcus Freeman, but losing to Northern Illinois in year 3, previously he had lost to Marshall. Like, that's unacceptable. Like, that is absolutely unacceptable. And the only thing that I can think of is that he's just not preparing the team appropriately, or not getting his guys fired up and ready to play any team. Because guess what? Anybody can be beaten on any given day in college football. Like, it's just the truth. And I wanted to give a quick shout out to Ontario Brown for Northern Illinois. That man had himself a day. He had 225 yards of offense by himself, 99 on the ground and 126 through the air. Like, he dominated Notre Dame in every facet of the game. And had Notre Dame, because he's honestly their best player for Northern Illinois, had they game planned and just been like, you know what, we're not going to let Ontario Brown beat us, Notre Dame probably would have walked out of there with a win. And lo and behold, they let him run up and down the field on them all day. And truthfully, and this might upset some Notre Dame fans, I feel that Notre Dame losing this game honestly should be close to an automatic disqualifier for the postseason, even with 12 teams getting in. Only reason I'm not 100% disqualifying them is because I'm not sure that we have as many great to elite teams in college football this year as many of us had thought. As we mentioned, Oregon's really struggling. We saw Bama. Yeah, the score is not indicative of how close that game was against USF. Like, I think some lesser teams may sneak their way into the field. And I'm not saying that Oregon can't be a great team come the end of the year, or that Bama can't be a great team come the end of the year. But like right now, to me, there appears to be three, maybe four great to elite teams in college football, and then there's a big gap. And so Notre Dame losing this game probably isn't going to be an automatic disqualifier if they run the table the rest of the way, because they do play USC. Like, they've got a couple games in here that if they win, they could find themselves in that 12-team dance. But man, it's damn near 100% disqualifier for me when you lose to Northern Illinois. I mean, that's just unacceptable.
Well, I'll say this. I mean, obviously, unacceptable loss. I mean, they probably thought that, in a way, that Texas A&M game was almost like the Super Bowl to them, and obviously, classic letdown spot.
Yeah.
So we'll see how they bounce back. They have to play strong to end the year. The good thing for them, once again, schedule's not that hard, but also a lot of the teams are going to be ranked in front of them. All have to play each other, and if they can just win out, they can probably still find their way in. That's kind of the beauty of the 12-team playoff, so to speak. So
Yeah, absolutely. Well, great recap here. Everybody and anybody that, joins us and listens, really, really appreciate you guys. If you guys can, drop a like, subscribe, leave some comments down below and let us know your thoughts on our thoughts and opinions. And honestly, if you, have the time, drop what your top 10 at this stage in the game of college football season looks like. We'd be really interested to see, because outside of, the top 4, 5, 6, I think it gets really muddled after that point. So, as always, really appreciate anybody and everybody that tunes in and listens. I'm excited to get on and do the next segment with you here in a couple days.
all right, thanks everyone.